is when you carry too much for too long and you break because of it. It's not just like I've got too many responsibilities, but it's when you carry the responsibility for outcomes of things that you can't control. We are told to obey Jesus daily, to follow the teachings of Scripture daily, but what we want to take control of is not just our obedience, but what happens in the future, what happens with other people. And when we carry that, it's too much and we break. It's a load we're never meant to carry. And we're looking at Elijah because Elijah is a classic story of burnout. And last week we looked at where he was. He's at the apex of his ministry. He's just done this amazing thing. God's done this amazing thing through him. He's gotten to do this climactic flannel graph type story. This story will be taught as one of the main 6 lessons in every Sunday school forever. And even after all of that, his response 1 week later is, will you please let me die? How does that happen? It happens because of burnout, because you carry too much for too long, and it's not what you're meant to carry. So we talked about how God responded to that, and went through the whole story. And what we're going to do now is going to look at the specific responses that God has and how we can apply those, because some of you are dealing with the same thing. You've definitely seen it in other people. Maybe you didn't recognize what it was, but burnout feels like and it looks like going to bed and waking up tired no matter how much or how long you sleep. It looks like thinking you're the only person that's doing anything, even though you're surrounded by other people who are working. And it looks like and feels like being irrationally angry at the people around you, the people that you should care about the most, but you're angry with them. Burnout causes you to see the world through a straw and not a window. It causes you to only see your own pain, only see your own responsibility, and it's a problem. Because burnout leads to divorces, it leads to career loss, it leads to midlife crises, it leads to pastors quitting their churches and leaving. Burnout is a problem that you need to be aware of and address, either because you're going to face it, or maybe you're already facing it, or you're going to be around somebody else that's facing it. If this was cancer, we'd take it more seriously. But because it's an emotional problem, we don't. But it has larger sometimes consequences within a church and within a family than cancer would, because it's something that's never dealt with. So we're looking at what God told Elijah and what he did for him. In 1 Kings chapter 19, we're going to just kind of recap this first one. God gave him 3 prescriptions for dealing with burnout. And the first one was rest. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 5 through 7, he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, I don't know if anybody Googled what a broom tree this week was, but I'm not going to explain it to you. I'll leave that to your Google search and curiosity. He lay down slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came and again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." Elijah is ready to die, and God says, "You know what you should do? You should rest." I'm not even going to address what you just said to me. I'm not going to address how wrong it is. I'm not going to address how disrespectful it was. You are in a place where what you need is rest. And the first prescription for us when we get to this place is the same thing, it's rest. Now, one of my favorite things about this is that God's first response is not condemnation. Like, how dare you not be able to carry this burden? How dare you not be able to handle this? How dare you get into a place when you're emotional and you can't be respectful to me? God's response is not condemnation. But it's, why don't you take a nap? We'll talk about this once you get rested up. God's first prescription is rest. But the problem is, and we're all good with that, right? We all like a nap, except for Clayton and Mike. I don't think they like naps. Everybody else loves a good nap. But it's not just rest, because we've got this weird, messed up idea about rest in modern Western culture, okay? And what we think rest is a necessary evil that stops us from working. You work and work and work, and you're supposed to keep working, but you break down and you have to go to sleep. So we think rest is a pill. We think rest is a vacation. We think rest is escapism. But rest is not a necessary evil. Instead, rest is a specific thing that God created to be enjoyed as part of life. If you remember back at the very beginning, God created a specific space for rest. Let's just read that in, come on, do what I told you to. Anybody want to catch this when I throw it in just a second? Genesis chapter 2. I thought I had it all figured out and worked out. Genesis chapter 2. On the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. I tell you the same thing over and over again, and I'm sure that some of you who are here all the time get tired of it, but I tell you that so that you actually remember it, okay? When it says that he made it holy, that doesn't mean he meant, like it's glowing and it's like it's got a halo on it. Holy means set apart, okay? That's what holy means, that it's set apart for a specific purpose. God worked for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, he created rest, and he set it apart for rest. That's what he did. Rest, we think of as rest is the thing that I have to do when I can't keep working anymore. But what God said is, no, rest is the thing that I want you to prepare for, I want you to enjoy, I want you to be excited about. Does anybody think God was too tired to keep working on the seventh? Is there anybody who's like, you know what, God, he was just so exhausted from 6 days of creation. He was like, I got to have a break. Because that's when we rest. I got to have a break. God said, no. And the general explanation for this is that God took a day of rest as an example for us. And he did take a day of rest as an example for us, not because he needed it. But I also think he took a day of rest because rest is supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be a thing that you look forward to. Why did God take a day of rest? Because he wanted to. Because it was a thing that he was excited about. Because after a week of work, what he wanted to do was spend a day with the family he had just created. It was something that wasn't a guilty thing, but something he was excited about. Asking why would God take a day of rest is like asking why would you eat birthday cake? Like, do I have to explain this? Why wouldn't you eat birthday cake? Right? This is a thing you should be excited about. It's a day that's set aside for rest and enjoyment and celebration. But we've got it so whacked out in our heads about what rest is, and we've got this whole guilt thing going on that we won't take it. Even when we take rest, we kill ourselves on the day of rest too from working so hard. But what God did is set aside a specific day of rest, and then he gave rules about it. Because we're people that can't just enjoy a good thing. We got to have rules to tell us how to enjoy the good thing. This is what he said when he first codified this idea, and I would love it if my computer would keep up so I know it's coming, but this is all going to be memory. So Exodus chapter 20, this is the 10 commandments, right? The big 10 where he talks about murder, and he talks about adultery, and he talks about idols. He also throws this in on number 4. He says this, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. Just in case you're curious, it's not just the men. Everybody gets a day off. It's not just free people. Everybody gets a day off. Right beside murder, right beside adultery, God said, you people, I said that one on purpose, you people need to rest. It's a thing that you need to do every week. There's a few reasons he did that. One is because we need a break. We're going to burn ourselves out if we don't take the break. But also, we need a day when we acknowledge that the world will not end if we stop. That the world does not depend on us. That the outcomes of every situation doesn't depend on us. And if we let the email slide for a day, if we let the text messages slide for a day, if we rest for a day, things will not come flying apart. We need a day where we acknowledge that he is God and we are not. And things depend on him, not us. Where he can be in charge for a day without our help. We need that. And he said, right beside murder, y'all take a day off once a week. You need a day to rest. And then they couldn't just let it sit. He had to get more specific about it. Later on in Exodus, I think it's Exodus 35, he says this, you shall kindle no fire at all in your dwelling places on the Sabbath day. You're not going to even build a fire on the Sabbath day. Why would he say that? We don't know. I got a guess, and this is a guess. My guess is that the men said, we're the ones that work. We need a day off. We also need a good meal. So women, keep working and doing all the things that you're doing. And on Sunday or Saturday, we also need you to keep up the meals going. So make sure you build a fire, make sure you gather wood, make sure you keep it all taken care of and feed the men because they've had a hard week of working and they need a day off. I don't know, but I can almost guarantee you that's what was happening. And so what did God say is no. The women get a day off too because they work all week too. And when you stop working for the day, they're probably going to keep working. The women need a day off too. The servants need a day off too. Everybody needs this day off. So God created this thing and said specifically after the 10 Commandments, hey, don't even build a fire. Well, what are you supposed to do on that day? Are you just supposed to eat bologna sandwiches? Like, what are we doing on our day of rest? This doesn't sound like a great day of rest, although I love a good fried bologna sandwich. Don't get me wrong. What are we supposed to do? Well, they had to prepare. If you look at the stories about the manna and how they would go out and gather it every day when all these things were given, they didn't just do without on Saturday. They would do work to prepare for rest. They would go out and gather enough wood for 2 days. They would go up and gather enough food for 2 days. They would build the fire and bank the fire so that the fire would stay going and you didn't have to build a new fire, but you just get that fire up and going. And then everybody's doing that, but you can't do a whole lot of stuff. Rest is best whenever you prepare for it, not whenever you just fall into it. That's why some of you don't enjoy your rest at all. You work and you work and you work and you work and you work until you fall down. And then you get up and keep working some more. And you're like, that wasn't enjoyable at all. Why would I set aside time for rest when it's just me being so exhausted I can't keep going? But God said, no, here's what I want. I want you to understand that rest is coming every week. I want you to look forward to it, and I want you to prepare for it so when the day of rest comes, you can actually enjoy it. It's not just a thing you fall into. It means for us, we're not out gathering sticks for wood, for fire. If you are, let's talk to your deacon and see what we can do to help you out. That you're not gathering sticks. I guess maybe Caleb is. But he's got a wood stove on purpose. He's choosing that. If you're cooking in your yard, come and talk to your deacon. But when we look at this, we're not necessarily gathering sticks, again, unless we're Caleb. What we're doing is we're saying, you know what? I'm going to take this day off, and that means I have to arrange my work differently. I have to prepare things differently. I have to set up some boundaries that I'm not going to cross. I have to make sure I turn my phone off at a certain point. I don't know what preparing for rest looks like for you in your situation, but rest is going to be better for you if you prepare for it than if you just fall into it. God said, hey, I want y'all to be prepared for this rest. I don't just want it to be a certain group of people resting it. I don't just want the free, wealthy men to do this. I want everybody to do this because you're all people and you all need a break. Now, Nehemiah says more about this than anybody else. And if you've been in the Sunday night small group, y'all studied through Nehemiah. It's one of my favorite books. He's one of my favorite Bible characters. Nehemiah is the governor of Jerusalem. After Babylon has conquered it, he's there and he goes through and rebuilds the walls and does a lot of cool stuff. But he says this in Nehemiah chapter 13 because they thought they had found a way around this. And what they were doing was they were having people from other cultures come in and they would work on the Sabbath and then the Jews would just go and buy from them. They would just go so they thought they had a way to get around it. And so this is what Nehemiah did in Nehemiah 13:15. I saw in those days I saw is what it actually says, in Judah, people treading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads which they brought in from Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day they sold food. Tyrians also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah in Jerusalem itself. He said, no, we're not supposed to be doing any kind of work. And since you people just can't enjoy a good thing, let me tell you what you can't do. You can't make stuff. You can't buy stuff. You can't sell stuff. You can't do any of that stuff on the Sabbath day. Now, I included this next part because I really like it and not because it's helpful to the sermon, but I just want you to know why I love Nehemiah. In Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 20, they didn't listen. The merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. But I warned them and said to them, why do you lodge outside the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath Nehemiah said, look, if you do this again, I'm going to lay hands on you, and it ain't going to be for prayer and healing. But when I get done, you will need prayer and healing. Y'all, this is serious. That rest is a serious, serious thing that you need. Serious enough that God put regulations around it. Here's the thing. We're not Old Testament Jews. So we're not under any of these requirements to do any of this way. But what we see is that God cares about this. This is the thing that God cares about. This is the thing that He wants for us. This is what we need, whether there's a requirement or not. But Jesus actually had to correct this a little bit because they went so far with it that they took it too far. They had rules about how far you can go, and they said, well, you can't carry a load within your household. So then they would create these wires, and they still have them. If you go to Manhattan, you can see the wire that goes all the way around the island of Manhattan so that that entire thing is counted as their household, and they can carry loads and work wherever they want to. They made up all these rules. But Jesus had to correct that because He was walking with the disciples on the Sabbath day. And He was walking through, and they were hungry as they were on their way to the synagogue, so they picked some grain and started eating it. And the religious leaders got really upset about this and said, your guys are working. You guys are working on the Sabbath, because they were harvesting grain. Like, they picked a handful of grain to chew on as they walked to church, is what they did. And they said, no, this is too much. This is working. God commanded this. It's like the people that want to measure out the birthday cake perfectly and say, you have to eat this much birthday cake. No more birthday cake, no less birthday cake. It's a fun party to be at. But this is what Jesus said in Mark chapter 2. He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He said, God created this as a gift to you. He created this to give you what you needed to help you out, not so that there would be a bunch of rules about it. The only reason there are rules about it is because He knew you wouldn't take it seriously. But this was a gift that was given to us. And this is the only one of the 10 Commandments that's not repeated in the New Testament. The principles and the ideas are there, but the command, take the Sabbath, is not repeated in the New Testament. That's why we don't have church on Saturday. We can do it whenever we want to. We can take this rest whenever we want to. It's not repeated. But God said, this is what I want you to do. This is the limitation that I want to put on it. And Jesus said, you got to understand that this is a gift to you, not a punishment. You can't work on this day. You can't do these things. In fact, if we look at the negative space of the Sabbath, not just the do these things, don't do these things, but all the things that aren't mentioned, what we see is God's actual intent for the Sabbath. We see what God intended for us to do. He intended for us to sleep. The Sabbath starts on Friday night at sundown. That's when it starts for the Jews. It starts at Friday night at sundown. And they have a big meal together that they cook before the sun goes down. And then they eat this big meal together. And you know what they do? They sleep and they rest. Not the rest of exhaustion, not the rest of, I've got to stop for a little while, I'm going to fall down, but the prepared for rest that comes from sleep. And we're all okay with that. We all sleep almost every night. We get that. We do that a lot. But there's a lot more going on in the day than just the sleep. What else are they doing? They worship. That was their day for worship, is they would come together on Saturday morning and they would worship. They would go to the synagogue, they would go to the temple, they would offer sacrifices, they would hear from the teaching of the synagogue. This is what they did, is they would worship. And it's not just about well, you got to go to church on Sunday. But it's the idea that rest comes when you acknowledge that the world does not depend on you, that rest is not just sleep, but you offload all the troubles onto God and cast your cares on Him, as 1 Peter tells us to do. That you shift the responsibility for the outcome of the world from yourself to Him, because that's really what worship comes down to. We can give a lot of definitions of worship and talk about how we worship and what we're supposed to do to worship. But what worship is acknowledging that He is and you're not. That He is greater than you, that He is God and you are not, and that you can't control everything, but He can. So you come to Him to acknowledge that and honor that toward Him. And that is rest. Whenever you look and say, I can't carry this load anymore, you have to carry that. I love the music. I love when we sing. I like when Brett picks out songs that have big, complicated words in them just to watch everybody. I love it. It's great. But worship is not just singing. And if all your worship is singing some songs, then you're missing the point. Worship is an attitude of the heart toward God. And worship can be done through singing, but your worship should be done in your work. That you work throughout the week and you work for Him, not for yourself, not for your boss. That worship should be done in your marriage, that you as a husband give up yourself and you as a wife submit and follow in a biblical way so that both of you are able to enjoy that marriage together by the husband giving himself up and the wife giving herself up, that you honor and worship through that way. That your parenting should be an act of worship. That you raise your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You're not just keeping them alive until they move out, but you raise them to honor God as an act of worship. Literally everything you do except sin can be an act of worship if your heart is pointed the right direction. But worship should be restful because at its heart, it's an acknowledgement that He has to because you can't. So they would sleep, they would worship, but what do you do for the rest of the day? What else is rest? Well, we just slept, so what else are we supposed to do? Well, what do you think they would do? They would spend time with their family. I want you to think about the dad that doesn't get to be with the family all week because he's a carpenter or he's a laborer, or he's working in the field, and from sunup to sundown, he is out working and he doesn't have any energy. What does he get to do on the Sabbath? He gets to push his kids on the swing on the Sabbath. What does mom get to do on the Sabbath? All week, she's with the kids and she's with everybody else, and on the Sabbath, she goes and hides so she can be alone. Right? They spent time with their families because that is part of rest. To celebrate together, to spend time together. You don't have a family so that you can raise them and then retire one day. You have a family so that you can enjoy that relationship. That's the point. That's what this is for. And if your rest is not about spending time with the people around you, then you're missing the point of rest. They would spend time together as neighbors. This is why the communities were so close, is because they didn't have TV. They had to be outside. They would go spend time together as a family. The old men were playing whatever the ancient Jewish version of horseshoes was. The old women are doing whatever it is that old women do. I have no idea. Randy Travis says they talk about old men. I don't know how accurate that is, but they just spend that time together. The neighbors played together. The kids played together. The husband and wife went on long walks together. They rested, but rest wasn't just sleep. It was community, and it was time together. Can you imagine what it would feel like if every Saturday that's what you did with your time? You turned off your phone on Friday night. You unplugged your computer and threw it in a river or something, so you couldn't get to it. And then you eat a big meal with your family, and then you sleep until you woke up. And then you took some time to worship. And then you played with your kids, hung out with your friends. And you did that every week for an entire day. What would that be like? How different would your life be? Personally, I think one of the reasons that we get so about the Sabbath and the idea of rest is because we've got this limited idea about what rest is supposed to be. But when you think that rest is not just, God took a nap all day and laid around and was bored, but rather that God rested by spending time with Adam and Eve, by enjoying His time with them, by walking around His creation and enjoying what was going on, by taking a day that wasn't about productivity, but was a day to just relax and enjoy what was created and all the work that you've done. You can see why the Sabbath for God was something special. And you can see what's missing for most of us. Because what do we call that day? What do we call a day where we get to spend time with family? We call that vacation. It's a thing we do once a year, maybe once every 2 years, that we set aside time for that. And we don't even enjoy it because we don't know how to enjoy it, because we're so wrapped into this idea. But why was Elijah so burnt out? He probably took the Sabbath. But if you don't take it with the attitude that you're not responsible for the world, He is, and you're going to take a day off and the world's not going to fly apart, then you don't get that. But the first thing that God said for Elijah was rest. And the thing that you need most is rest. A time to enjoy, a time to relax, a time to actually spend time with the family that you're working so hard to pay for, working so hard to take care of. What would it be like for this church if we took a day of rest and we're not going to do all the Sabbath requirements. We're not going to look back at the Old Testament rules, but we're going to look at the purpose and we're going to say, you know what? Today, I'm going to spend time with my wife and my kids. I'm going to spend time with my husband. I'm going to have friends over. We're going to have a big meal. We're going to celebrate together and we're going to play some games. We're just going to have a good time. And you did that every week. How much closer would this church be? Would I have to tell you to be the church to one another? Would I have to tell you, hey, y'all check on Rick and Rita, y'all check on David? Would I have to tell you to do that? No, because every Saturday you'd be getting together with people and there would be people in their circle that would be taking care of them. There would be people in their circle that would know what was going on because every week they spent this time together. But we don't do this. We don't do it. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a gift given to us by God. Rest is not a necessary evil that God inflicts upon you when you run out of energy to work. But it's the thing that you look forward to. It's the thing that you work to get to. It's the birthday cake that you should want. But if we continue with this idea that rest is a necessary evil, that we're somehow less than if we ever stop, that the idea of taking a day off and disconnecting means that the world is going to fly apart and everything is going to end. If we never do that, we're going to burn out just like Elijah. You'll be miserable just like Elijah. And there will be days that on the best week you've ever had, you're going to be killing it at work. Everything's going to be going great. Family's going to be doing well. Bills are going to be paid. And you're going to get to Saturday and you're going to say, I'm no better than my fathers. Can I just die, please? Not because God is bad to you, not because anything is wrong with your life, but because you're so emotionally exhausted that the only thing you can see is your pain. So what do we do with this? What do I want from you? Well, what I want from you, go on, Tori, to the next one. I want you to make a Sabbath in your life. We did this a couple of years ago. I don't know if you've been here long enough to remember, there have been times that I've just run dry. And I told you. I don't tell you that anymore because it was a strong reaction when I told you that. But I'm just empty. I'm dry. I have nothing left to give you. And I'm going to stand up here and preach and I'm going to say what God has to say, but I have nothing to give you. Some of y'all have seen me in times like that. And with the things that are going on, I had to make a change. And the change that we made was we created a Sabbath in our family. Our Saturday is our Sabbath. I made some rules about when I was going to work and how I was going to work. And right now I work 5 days a week. I work a Sunday through Thursday. That's when I do all of my work. Friday is my day that I do housework. I do whatever the chores are. I do the bills. I take care of I got to do the taxes pretty soon. I do those things on Fridays. And Saturday is our family Sabbath, where we hang out as a family. We hang out with friends. I experiment when it comes to cooking and do weird stuff, with the griddle or with the smoker. Our Saturday is our day. And let me tell you something. At first, it was really, really hard, but it has changed our lives. And it's the thing I look forward to most in the week. And if I don't get it, I get super cranky. I get really cranky. I'm going to have to work hard the week of the Easter egg hunt because that's on me on my Sabbath day, and I'm going to be working. And I've come to treasure it so much that I got to work really hard on my attitude that day because I can't rest in the day. And we have times that we can't do that, and there's no rule. It's not a sin if we can't do that, if something comes up and we got to go work. But that day is set aside for us, and it has changed our lives. And I'm begging you to make a Sabbath in your life. Don't make it a hard and fast rule that you have to keep it every time, and these are the rules that you have to follow. You can't drive, and your wife can't build a fire, and all those things. Like, don't do that. But decide as a family, we're going to set aside a day of rest. And that day is going to be about restful things. That doesn't mean napping all day, although there could be some napping in there. What it means is that we're going to do things that set aside work for a week, for a day, and that say, you know what? God is God and we are not. And the world will not end if we stop for 24 hours. Make a Sabbath and it'll change your life. I guarantee you it'll change your life. What's next, Tori? We got to prepare for rest. If you come at this and all you're doing is waiting until Saturday and you fall into it, you can do that. But if instead you as a family will say, you know what? Saturday is the day that we're going to rest, so we got other things that we've got to do this week to make sure that we're not stressed out on Saturday because we're looking at the mess that wasn't cleaned up. And mom can't rest if she's sitting there looking at the mess that's cleaned up. And if she can't rest, ain't nobody resting, right? That kind of thing. If you don't prepare for that throughout the week, if you don't structure your week in such a way that you can actually enjoy what God has created for you, it can happen, but it's not going to be what it needs to be. Prepare for that rest. Learn to enjoy your life. Spend time with friends and learn to enjoy that rest. For some of you, the idea of doing that is making your heart race a little faster, right? Because the idea of taking a day that you rest makes you feel so stressed out and so guilty about that you can't bring yourself to do it. And let me tell you what that is. That is you having a larger view of yourself than is true. Because you think that everything is going to fall apart and you're going to be less of a person and people are going to judge you and people are going to look down on you and you're not going to be valuable enough if you keep going, if you stop and take a rest. That's what we're trying to talk about today. That if you do that, then you're somehow guilty, you're somehow sinful if you ever just rest. And let me tell you something. You're wrong. God said at the very beginning, I know these people and I know how they're going to be. And so I'm going to set apart a day and make it holy. So that anytime somebody says, you're somehow less for taking a day off, they have to call me less. They have to say, I'm less for taking a day of rest. The first one to take a day of rest was God. And if you look at that yourself and you say, I can't do that because people who do that, they're somehow less, they're somehow weak, the accusation you're making is not just against yourself, but it's against God himself. You've got to learn to do this. And guys, learning things is hard. It might take you some time to learn to do this. It might take you some time to learn to enjoy this. It takes time to learn anything. But if you don't start, you'll never get there. Now, here's the last thing that I want to talk to you about, because there's one element of rest that we haven't talked about. And that is the fact that if you're not resting in Jesus, then none of the rest of this really accounts for anything. We were told that Jesus is our Sabbath, that Jesus is the one that we find rest in, that we can rest because of his work. And when we talk about worship and we talk about guilt around rest and we talk about all of these things that come along with it, the attitude is really the problem. The attitude says, I should be able to do this. I can do this. I can keep going. I don't have to stop. But the heart of our faith is this: you can't. You can't be good enough on your own. You can't be enough on your own. That's the whole reason Jesus had to come and die for you, is because you couldn't do it on your own. And what you need is a Savior who will step in and be God for you, because you make a terrible God. You are a sinner and you've fallen short of the standard given by God. And all of us have this desire to work hard enough to measure up. But you will never, ever, ever measure up. You only reach that measurement when you stand on him. You only reach that measurement when he stands in your place. And if your idea of rest comes down to, I'm going to make a Sabbath and I'm going to create a Saturday and I'm going to do all of this, but you never trust in Jesus for that rest, the rest of knowing that your eternity is secure, then all of this temporary stuff means nothing. Rest in him. Find a day of rest. Find a time of rest. Don't worry about what I do. Don't worry about what Brittany does. Find a day of rest. Because when we look at Elijah, what we see is a man who should be celebrating, and he's not. A man who should be excited about what's happening in his life, and he's not. A man who should be able to just rest in the promises of God, and he's not. And the first thing that God said to him when he found himself there was, rest. And if you feel yourself there right now, the answer for you is rest. But this is not just medicine we take when we get sick. This is a thing that we should build into our lives every day so that we don't get to that point. I want to just give you a little practical advice. There are some people in this church that may need a rest from the roles they've taken on in this church. You take on a lot of work, and I appreciate you, and you're honoring God through it, but sometimes you take on too much, and you need a rest. What our general reaction, though, is not to take a rest, but to quit. And that's not the answer. Now, if you are someone that takes on a role in this church and you're working every week on top of everything else that you're doing, and you're feeling yourself getting to that point, I want you to know I'm not going to be mad at you if you say you need a rest. I'm not going to be mad at you if you say, I need a bit of a break, because I get it. But at the same time, what I want you to understand is that there's a difference between a break and quitting. I have people that come in and we meet for our membership conversation. I'm like, tell me about your time with God. Tell me about your time with Jesus. Tell me about your salvation. Tell me about your work in church. And they tell me of these stories, and I hear these people tell these stories about church. Like, well, I was really involved in this, and I was really involved in this, and I ran the bus ministry, and we worked with kids, and we taught these classes, and worked the nursery, and it just got to be too much because we did too much. And so we took a break. I say, okay, how long has that break lasted? And they look at each other. I say, well, I guess it's been about 10 years now that we've been resting. Guys, that ain't rest. You quit. And if you need a break in this church because you're doing too much, understand, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to take 3 months off. Why 3 months? Because if you measure out the time that Elijah took a break, between the starting point and the travel time and all the other things that God took him, it came out to about 3 months. But also, if you look at what counselors will tell you to do, if you talk to a therapist, talk to a counselor in burnout, they're going to tell you about 3 months, because 3 months is the period of time that you're able to take a break and still want to get back into it. But when you cross that 3-month line, it's going to be harder and harder and harder for you to go back. I love you. And I want you to be a part of this church for a long time. I want you to work hard, and I want you to work hard in this church. But that only happens if you take care of yourself and take a break when you need it. Now, if you come to me and say, I work in the nursery once every 16 weeks, and I really need a break from that, I'll give you a break, but I'm not sure that's what you need a break from. But we have people in this church that teach every Wednesday night. They lead small groups every week. They're serving every week. And guys, when they need a break, we need to give it to them, or we're going to lose them. We're not going to do that. I also need you to understand that I, as a pastor, there are going to be times that I need a break. What's recommended for pastors by most counselors is for every 7 years to take 3 months sabbatical. And that sabbatical is not a 3-month vacation, but it's different work to get refocused and back on track. And in the next couple of years, I'm going to have one. And I just want you to know that. What happens with pastors a lot of times is they get to that point, they know they're at burnout, and they don't understand it well enough, and they think that God's calling them to go somewhere else. Because they're so angry, and they're so hurt, and they're so tired, they think, this must not be the place for me anymore. And I've been praying to God for 6 years that I would spend the rest of my ministry here, and I want that. But what that means is there's going to come a point where I have to have a break. I cannot pour out emotionally. I cannot carry the emotional load of everything that's going on with you and your problems and this church forever without burning out. And I just want to prepare you that there's going to come a point when I have to say, I need to stop for a minute. Some of you have seen burnout in pastors. You know what it looks like. You've seen that anger. You've seen that frustration. You've seen them turn on the church. And I don't want to be there. And we all know that I'm above average, right? We're all That's a joke. We all know that, but there comes a point where I can't keep going. And if I want to stay at this church forever, you have to understand that I have to have rest to do it. And I'm going to take it. This is a weird sermon for me to preach because I feel like I'm pretending to be a therapist or a counselor. I'm really not trying to do that. If you need help, you can come and talk to me and I'll talk to you, but I'm probably going to send you to a professional, at least a professional at this. I'm a professional at other things. But when I look at the story of Elijah, I see a man who loved God, who was jealous for God, who served God. But because he did it in an unhealthy way, he nearly broke. And the idea that some of you would be serving God in that same way, but would be laying at home at night under your broom tree thinking, I'm not going to do anything about it. But if I died, I'd be okay with that. The idea that you would get to that point hurts me. And so I'm going to preach weird sermons for the next couple of weeks because I love you and I want to take care of you. But you are responsible for taking these steps. And if you don't like these sermons, 3 weeks I'll be back to regular. But give me the next 2 to go through what God told Elijah to do and what he has for you to do. Stand with me, please. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you and I'm so grateful for the chance to gather together and worship. And I'm grateful that you love us enough to command a Sabbath, to set aside a Sabbath, to set aside rest, Lord. We've gotten this so mixed up in our heads. This Western work ethic that we have that benefits us so much has gotten us so mixed up about this that we can't take rest. We don't even understand what it is. And I ask, Lord, today that we would take your priorities and your instructions seriously. That we would look to the example of Elijah and what you did for him, Lord, and that we would follow it. Lord, there have been times that I've looked at this church and I've worried about specific people. And I don't know right now, Lord, if there's someone that I need to be concerned about that's near burnout, that's struggling. But if there is, I ask that we would be able to see it as a church, that we wouldn't miss it, but that we would see it in each other, and that we would come alongside one another and recommend rest, that we would take burdens off of one another to help each other. I ask that you would help us to love one another well enough to look out not just for whether we're here or how we seem, but to look out for what we need. I ask that we as a church would develop this culture of a Sabbath and that we would spend time together on that Sabbath. That this church would become so connected because of these times of rest that we would be inseparable. And I ask, Lord, that we would have patience and grace for those who need rest. That we wouldn't be judgmental about it, but that we would celebrate when somebody recognizes that they need it. I thank you, Lord, and it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.